Hey guys, it's Miss Binion, and this is the PowerPoint for Truman in the Cold War, post-World War II society. Our essential questions for this particular PowerPoint is: how does fear threaten freedom? What consequences or advancements were made during post-war America? And how do human rights advance during the 50s, 60s, and 70s? Here's our learning targets that we're going to be covering today. And we're going to start with Harry Truman, our president, from April 12, 1945, right when FDR passed away, to January 20th, 1953. So everything in this PowerPoint has to do with Harry Truman's presidency, and that's how we're going to go through the decades, is looking at the different presidents. When was he president? 1945 to 1953. When? 1945 to 1953. Write it down. All right, so post-war America, there's prosperity in America after World War II. GI Bill for the veterans, which is federal government paid for veterans to get a college education. There was baby boom, which we call these people the baby boomers. This is after people came back from World War II. There was lots of marriages and lots of births, so I'll let you think about that. But that really has an impact later on in the 80s and 90s. People start moving to the suburbs. Typically middle class move away from the cities. It's going to cause inner cities to have lots of poverty. And then the Sun Belt, people move to the south, which transfers power and money to the south. Some economics of the Truman era, some things that he did. The Employment Act of 1946 was a series of bills that increased minimum wage, set regulations for national health insurance, and also there was many inflations and strikes. So Truman wanted there to be price controls, but the Republican Congress did not. So they got rid of price controls from wartime, and this made the prices go up, and they increased by 25%. Also, Truman did, sort of in line with the New Deal, he did the Fair Deal, which focused on national health care, federal aid to education, just a few of those, and really many of these were defeated. They were not passed because Truman and Congress did not get along. Truman and civil rights. Truman challenged racial discrimination, so he was against it. And Truman's a Democrat, remember. He established the Committee on Civil Rights in 1946. He ends racial discrimination in the federal government, including the armed forces. Y'all, that's really, 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 really important right here. And Fair Employment Practices Commission, he tried to implement a commission saying that employers could not discriminate, but this was blocked by Congress. So Truman is in the executive branch, and he's Democrat, but the Congress is controlled by Republicans, so they weren't able to get a lot of things passed. Some politics during Truman's administration: the 22nd Amendment in 1951 established a term limit for president, and it limits each president to 2 terms. This was after FDR. And then we have the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947, which checks growing power of unions, and this actually hurts labor unions and makes it so that they decrease a little bit. So after World War II, what were some of the outcomes? Millions of people were killed. There's large areas of Europe and Asia that were destroyed. The Allied powers occupied Japan. And there's a conflict between the Soviet Union and other allies over the fate of Eastern Europe. What is the biggest effect? That the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the world's major powers. So at the end of the war, they had the Potsdam Conference, and basically this is when the Allied leaders, Truman, Stalin, and Churchill, met in Germany, and they set up zones to control and to inform the Japanese that if they refused to surrender at once, they would face total destruction. So they decided to, number 1, divide up Germany into 4 zones, which also divided up Berlin. And the Soviet Union was going to control 1/3 of it, and the remaining 2/3 were controlled by the U.S., France, and Great Britain. This gets rid of Nazi influence and those who had committed crimes during the war. All right, so here is a picture that shows you Germany and how it was divided. So we have Soviet Union, we have Great Britain, we have France, and we have America here. And you can see Berlin is divided up just the same. All right, so in Berlin's capital city. Sorry about that picture. All right, so tensions are rising. The Soviets want Eastern Germany and the lands that Germany had occupied, and Joseph Stalin agreed to let them choose their own government. However, the U.S., Britain, and France are concerned that would not happen. All right, which is going to lead us into what we know as the Cold War, 1945 to 1991. The Cold War is a competition that developed between the USA and the Soviet Union for power and influence in the world. It lasted 45 years. And there was no actual war. It's just fought with angry words and threats. And this develops into what we call a nuclear arms race. This is the image for the United Nations. And what is the United Nations? It was formed in April 1945. It replaced the League of Nations, which really wasn't effective because America never joined it. And basically it uses force to end wars. Okay, it's like a worldwide peacekeeping council. All right, so here's the permanent members, and you can see the Soviet Union and the United States are both on it. So interesting. So why are they at it? The U.S. goals, they want a democratic Europe and a capitalist European economy. Soviets want to protect their own interests and security, and they want a communist Europe. So this is going to cause a problem. Oops, sorry. Okay, so you can see here, we have lining up, it almost looks like another world war. All of these countries are communist, all these countries are non-communist, and here we are on this same line, just like World War I and World War II, fighting the same sort of thing, except there's no actual fighting in this, okay? This is right here, the division between communist and non-communist is what we call the Iron Curtain. All right, which leads us to containment. It's a U.S. policy to contain communism during the Cold War. So Truman, our president of this PowerPoint, issued this in March 1947, and he said he would support free nations threatened by communism. And both Korea and Vietnam wars were because of the Truman Doctrine. And coming back to that Iron Curtain, basically it divides East versus West Europe and communist versus non-communist Europe. And Winston Churchill used this phrase in a 1946 speech, which we'll read in class, that described nations under Soviet domination. This border kept people in and out and stopped them from escaping. All right, and this is just his quote about the Iron Curtain. Some things that were going on at the time. The Soviet Union blockaded Berlin after the Allied zones merged in Germany, and those people that were stuck in West Berlin, they had to be airlifted out because they could not, things had to be airlifted in, like food and supplies, because they could not get out of Berlin. They were trapped. Okay, so Cold War heats up. All right, so couple things that are happening at the time. The Marshall Plan, America decides to invest money into Western Europe so that they do not fall to communism. So we figured if we gave them money that they would be able to rebuild and they would choose democracy. This is Marshall, George Marshall, and he's the one who came up with the Marshall Plan. He was a general. And so you can see how much food, fuel, cotton, and all of this other stuff, this is in millions of dollars that we gave to Europe. And you can see where our money's at. You can see on the line here, it's not a whole lot of money, but we gave a lot of money to the major powers, okay? So this is when NATO is formed, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is a democratic nations from Europe and North America. It's interesting that's in the news today, so you may want to listen to that. It was formed to defend Europe from Soviet attack, and this gives us collective security. So the Soviets were like, hey, the non-communist countries have formed a union, so what are we going to do about it? So the Soviets can't come back with what they call the Warsaw Pact, and it's communist nations. So you have two different alliance groups occurring here. Red flags, anybody, have we heard of this before? We also have CETA, which is the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, and this is kind of like NATO, but it's between America and Southeast Asia. Unfortunately, only 2 Southeast Asian countries became members. All right, so what we have here is an arms race, a struggle between nations to gain an advantage of weapons. The U.S. and Soviet Union started increasing their stockpile of nuclear weapons, and this is when things get crazy. All right, and that is where we're going to stop today. So I hope you all have a great night. Bye.